The night he didn't come home. The wind began rising before dusk, sweeping across the frontier plains with a hollow cry that rattled the loose boards of Clara Whitmore's cabin. By the time darkness settled, the house felt less like a home and more like something abandoned, though she still sat inside it, waiting. Clara Whitmore was 9 months pregnant and alone at her kitchen table, her swollen hands resting protectively over the life shifting inside her. The fire had burned low, and she did not rise to feed it. She was listening for hoofbeats that did not come. Thomas Whitmore had once ridden home before sunset. In the early months of their marriage, he had carried laughter through the doorway along with the smell of hay and pine. He had spoken of acreage and livestock, of prosperity and sons who would inherit strong hands and steady backs. Clara had believed every word because she had believed in him. She had followed him west with the certainty of a woman who trusted her husband more than she feared the wilderness. But ambition had a way of souring in isolation. The farm had struggled through its first winter. Crops failed. Livestock dwindled. The frontier town proved smaller and less forgiving than Thomas expected. Each disappointment carved something hard into his expression. Where he once saw opportunity, he now saw confinement. Where he once saw partnership, he began to see burden. Clara had noticed the change before she allowed herself to name it. He stayed out later. He spoke less. When she told him about the baby quickening inside her, he had smiled, but it had been the smile of a man calculating cost, not celebrating life. She convinced herself that pressure made men quiet. She told herself that once the child arrived, everything would settle. Then the whispers began. Margaret Hale, the merchant's daughter, had returned to town that spring. She was well-dressed despite the dust, lively despite the scarcity. Clara heard the comments at the well first. 2 women lowering their voices as she approached, then offering tight smiles that did not reach their eyes. She dismissed it as boredom-seeking scandal, until she saw them. One afternoon, determined to surprise Thomas with fresh bread, Clara walked slowly toward the general store, careful of her balance. Through the broad front window, she saw her husband standing too close to Margaret. Thomas was leaning against the counter, his head tilted in a way Clara recognized as intimate. Margaret laughed, her hand resting lightly against his chest as though it belonged there. Clara did not step inside. She stood frozen, her breath shallow, as Thomas reached for Margaret's hand and held it a moment longer than courtesy allowed. The gesture was small, almost defensible, but betrayal is often built from moments that can be explained away if one is willing to lie to oneself. She returned home without delivering the bread. That night, she asked him plainly, "Are you unhappy with me?" Thomas paused only briefly before removing his coat. What kind of question is that? The kind a wife asks when her husband stops looking at her. He exhaled sharply, as though burdened by her perception. I'm tired, Clara. Tired of scraping by. Tired of feeling trapped in a life that grows smaller by the day. And I trap you. Her voice did not rise. It trembled. You wouldn't understand, he said, which was not an answer but a dismissal. You sit here while I carry everything. She stared at him, stunned not by the accusation, but by the distance in his tone. I carry your child. The words lingered between them. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, agitation replacing guilt. Maybe that's part of it. We weren't ready. Another mouth to feed when we can barely feed ourselves. The baby shifted sharply within her, as though reacting to the tension. Clara pressed her palm to her abdomen. You speak as if he is a mistake. I speak as if he is reality, Thomas snapped. Silence followed, heavy and irreversible. When he left the cabin that night, he did not say where he was going. The door shut with a finality that echoed long after his footsteps faded. He did not return the next evening, or the one after that. On the third day, Clara forced herself into town despite the strain in her back and the tightening low in her belly. The stable boy avoided her gaze. The shopkeeper offered stiff sympathy. It was Mrs. Dawson, the midwife, who finally spoke the truth with reluctant kindness. Thomas sold 2 horses yesterday, she said quietly. Left before dawn with Miss Hale. The words did not strike like lightning. They settled slowly like ash. He'll come back, Clara heard herself say, though she did not recognize the voice as her own. Mrs. Dawson's silence answered her. Clara walked home in measured steps, refusing to hurry despite the tears blurring her path. The cabin greeted her exactly as she had left it, cold, sparse, unchanged. Only now it felt undeniably empty. Thomas had not merely strayed. He had prepared to leave. He had sold their strongest horses. He had taken what little security remained. He had chosen another life. As evening fell once more, the wind returned, harsher than before. Clara lit the fire herself, each strike of flint a small declaration of defiance. She would not collapse. She would not beg for a man who saw fatherhood as imprisonment. But as night deepened, a sharp pain gripped her abdomen and stole her breath. She steadied herself against the table, counting through the ache. When it passed, another followed, stronger, closer. Clara looked toward the door Thomas had walked through 3 nights earlier. "He left us," she whispered, not an accusation now, but an acceptance. Outside, the storm gathered strength. Inside, the first true labor pain bent her forward, and for the first time since her wedding day, Clara Whitmore understood that survival might depend not on the man she married, but on her own endurance. And she was utterly alone. The man who stopped. The storm did not rage, it pressed. Snow fell in relentless sheets, muting the landscape into a vast, indifferent white. Inside the cabin, Clara Whitmore gripped the edge of the table as another contraction seized her, stronger than the last and impossible to ignore. The intervals between them had shortened. Time itself seemed to tighten with her body. She had delivered nothing in her life but patience. Now she was expected to deliver a child, alone. Clara forced herself toward the hearth and added the last of the firewood. The flames flickered weakly, as though uncertain whether to fight the cold. She counted her breaths the way Mrs. Dawson had once instructed her. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Steady, controlled, unafraid. But fear does not dissolve because it is commanded. Another contraction folded her forward, and this time she did not recover as quickly. A dangerous thought began to take shape. If she stayed, she might not survive the night. If she walked into the storm, she might not survive the road. Either choice carried risk. Only one offered possibility. Clara wrapped herself in Thomas's heavy coat, the one he had not bothered to take, and stepped outside. The wind cut instantly through wool and resolve alike. Snow obscured the path to town, yet she knew the direction by instinct. She moved slowly, one hand bracing her back, the other cradling the weight of her abdomen. Each step required negotiation with pain. Each breath burned. Halfway down the slope beyond their property, her strength faltered. The ground tilted beneath her vision. She reached for the fence post, but misjudged the distance. The world narrowed into white and then into nothing. Dr. Elijah Carter had been on the road since dawn, returning from a distant farm where fever had claimed a child before he arrived. He rode without hurry now, the kind of measured pace born of familiarity with loss. At 38, he had learned that urgency did not always equate to salvation. He saw the shape in the snow before he recognized it as human. Elijah dismounted immediately. The figure lay partially shielded by a drift, dark hair tangled against the pale ground. When he turned her gently onto her back, recognition struck. Mrs. Whitmore. Her skin was cold, her pulse faint but present. Even through layers of fabric, her pregnancy was unmistakable. The storm had begun erasing her footprints. Another hour and it might have erased her entirely. He did not hesitate. Lifting her carefully, he carried her to his horse and secured her with practiced efficiency. His medical training had been earned in cities, but his endurance had been forged here. The frontier demanded decisiveness. It did not forgive delay. By the time he reached his small clinic, a structure that served equally as home, Clara was stirring weakly. Her lashes fluttered as he laid her near the hearth. "You're safe," he told her, though safety was a relative term. Her eyes struggled to focus. "The baby," she whispered. "I know." Another contraction tightened her body before she could say more. Elijah assessed quickly. Labor was well advanced. Transporting her farther would be impossible. Sending for the midwife would cost time they did not possess. He rolled up his sleeves. "I will not let you face this alone," he said, more to anchor her than to reassure himself. Clara gripped his forearm as pain surged again. "My husband. He is not here," Elijah answered evenly. "But I am." The hours that followed were disciplined chaos. Water heated. Linens were prepared. Instructions were given in a voice that did not waver. Clara moved between lucidity and exhaustion, yet she followed his guidance with remarkable focus. She did not scream. She did not surrender to panic. Even in betrayal, she retained dignity. Elijah recognized resilience when he saw it. Between contractions, she searched his face. "Will he live?" "That is our intention," he replied. He did not promise what he could not control. When the child finally emerged, his cry cut through the storm like a declaration of defiance. Strong, immediate, alive. Relief did not show in Elijah's expression until he placed the newborn against Clara's chest. Only then did his shoulders lower slightly. "You have a son," he said. Tears gathered in Clara's eyes. Not fragile tears, but fierce ones. She held the infant as though anchoring herself to existence. "He didn't want him," she murmured. Elijah met her gaze. Then he misjudged what he was given. The fire burned steadier now. Outside, the storm continued its indifferent sweep, but within the small clinic a different atmosphere had formed. One of fragile survival and unspoken alliance. Clara studied the child's features, tracing the curve of his cheek with trembling fingers. "I cannot return to that cabin," she said quietly. It was not a plea. It was recognition. Elijah understood the implications. Shelter meant proximity. Proximity meant scrutiny. A woman abandoned by her husband, living under the roof of a widow doctor, would feed the town's appetite for speculation. Yet he did not calculate reputation first. "You will remain here until you are strong," he said. "After that, we will decide what comes next." "We." The words settled between them with unexpected weight. Clara closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the warmth of the room and the steady breathing of her son. For the first time since Thomas had walked away, she did not feel entirely forsaken. Elijah turned toward the window, where snow continued to veil the horizon. Somewhere beyond it lay a man who had abandoned responsibility. Somewhere behind him lay a town that would judge before it understood. But in this room, a different conflict was forming, not of survival, but of choice. Clara Whitmore had been left to die. Instead, she had been found, and the consequences of that rescue had only just begun. The weight of staying. Clara remained in Dr. Elijah Carter's clinic because leaving would have been an act of pride, not strength. 3 days after the storm, she could sit upright without dizziness, though standing still required determination. Her son, whom she had named Samuel, slept in a wooden cradle Elijah had assembled from spare lumber store behind the clinic. The structure was simple, sturdy, and built without unnecessary ornamentation, much like the man who had crafted it. Gratitude, Clara discovered, was easier to manage than dependence. Elijah moved through the clinic with restrained efficiency, tending to patients in the front room and checking on her between visits. He never lingered longer than propriety allowed. He knocked before entering. He spoke to her as if she were capable, not fragile. The distinction mattered. On the 4th morning, Clara rose before he did. She wrapped Samuel carefully and attempted to sweep the small kitchen space adjoining the clinic. The effort left her breathless, but it restored something within her that abandonment had stripped away. Elijah found her standing by the stove. "You should be resting," he said, though there was no reprimand in his tone. "I have rested," she replied. "I will not become an invalid in your home." A faint crease appeared between his brows. "It is not my home alone at present." The correction was subtle but intentional. Clara met his gaze, understanding the boundary he was drawing, not of exclusion, but of shared circumstance. She was not charity. She was not scandal. She was simply here. Yet the town did not share that clarity. Whispers began within days. A woman collecting medicine paused too long at the doorway. A rancher's wife asked questions thinly disguised as concern. Clara could feel curiosity pressing against the walls of the clinic as persistently as the storm once had. Let them speak, Elijah said when she mentioned it. Speculation fades faster than truth. Does it? She asked quietly. He considered before answering. Not always, but it matters less than survival. Survival. The word had defined her existence for weeks. Now it shifted meaning. She was no longer fighting for breath. She was fighting for dignity. That afternoon, Mrs. Dawson visited under the pretense of checking on the baby. The midwife's experienced eyes missed little. She observed the cradle, the orderly linens, the distance maintained between Clara's chair and Elijah's desk. You look stronger, Mrs. Dawson said approvingly. I am, Clara replied. The older woman hesitated. There's talk that Thomas has been seen east of here. The name no longer struck like lightning. It felt instead like an old bruise, tender but no longer raw. With her? Clara asked. No, alone. Elijah, who had been sorting medical instruments nearby, did not interrupt. Yet Clara sensed his attention sharpen. Men who leave in passion often return in regret, Mrs. Dawson added carefully. Regret does not rebuild trust, Clara answered. The midwife studied her for a moment, then nodded as though recognizing a transformation. Clara was no longer the waiting wife. Something within her had hardened, not into bitterness, but into discernment. After Mrs. Dawson departed, silence settled between Clara and Elijah. You are not obligated to remain here if his return troubles you, Elijah said at last. It does not trouble me, she replied. It clarifies me. He looked at her more closely then. Clarifies what? That I cannot measure my future against his weakness. The word surprised even her, yet once spoken, they felt indisputable. Samuel stirred in his cradle, releasing a soft cry. Elijah reached him first, lifting the infant with confident care. Clara watched the gesture, not because it was unusual, but because it was consistent. He did not hold the child awkwardly or distantly. He held him as though presence required no permission. You are good with him, she observed. I have delivered many children, Elijah said. Few remain long enough for me to know them. There was history in that statement, though he did not elaborate. Clara sensed loss there, restrained and private. It echoed her own in a different register. Why did you stay? She asked gently. Here, on the frontier. He adjusted Samuel in his arms before answering. Because leaving would have meant surrendering to what I could not save. The honesty in his voice unsettled her more than comfort would have. A knock interrupted them. Elijah opened the door to find a young, stable hand shifting nervously from foot to foot. Doctor, the boy said, glancing past him into the room. There's a man asking for Mrs. Whitmore in town. Clara's breath stilled. He wouldn't give his name, the boy continued, but he said he has a right to see her. Silence expanded, deliberate and heavy. Elijah did not look at Clara immediately. He finished securing Samuel in her arms before turning back to the messenger. Tell him Mrs. Whitmore is recovering and not receiving visitors. The boy hesitated. He didn't seem the sort to accept that. Then he may return when invited. Elijah replied evenly. The door closed. Clara felt neither panic nor relief, only inevitability. Thomas had left in certainty. If he returned, it would be with need. He will come here, she said. Yes, Elijah agreed. She looked down at her son, tracing the small curve of his ear. Then he will see what he abandoned. Outside, the town waited for confrontation. Inside, Clara felt something steadier than fear take root. Not anger, resolve. And when the knock finally came again, firmer this time, it did not find her unprepared. What he chose to lose. The knock did not carry hesitation. It struck the clinic door with the confidence of a man accustomed to being answered. Clara did not flinch at the sound. She adjusted Samuel in her arms and remained seated, allowing Elijah to cross the room first. When the door opened, Thomas Whitmore stood framed by winterlight. He looked thinner than she remembered. The careful polish he once carried had dulled into fatigue. His coat was worn, his boots dusted with the residue of travel. Yet his posture attempted familiarity, as though absence had been an inconvenience rather than abandonment. Elijah, he said, nodding stiffly, I'm here for my wife. The claim settled heavily in the air. Clara rose before Elijah could respond. The movement cost her strength, but she refused to receive Thomas sitting down. Samuel stirred softly against her chest, a quiet reminder of what had endured. "I am here," she said. Thomas's eyes shifted to her, then immediately to the child. Something unreadable flickered across his expression. Calculation, perhaps, or surprise at seeing proof of consequence. "You look well," he offered, as though commenting on weather. "I survived," Clara replied. The words dismantled the pretense between them. Thomas stepped inside without invitation. "I heard there was a storm, that you were ill." His gaze lingered on Elijah briefly. "Seems you found assistance." "I was found," Clara corrected. He ignored the distinction. "Margaret left," he said bluntly. "She wasn't suited for this life. I made a mistake." The confession lacked remorse. It carried inconvenience. Elijah remained near the doorway, neither retreating nor intruding. His stillness was deliberate, a silent assurance rather than a challenge. Thomas extended a hand toward the child. "Let me see him." Clara did not move. "You forfeited that right when you rode away," she said evenly. His jaw tightened. "I was overwhelmed. You don't understand what it's like, to feel trapped by expectations you never agreed to." "You agreed when you married me," Clara answered. "You agreed when you spoke of sons and land. You agreed when you watched me carry your child." Samuel shifted again, sensing tension. Clara's hold tightened protectively. Thomas's composure began to fracture. "I came back, didn't I? That counts for something." "It counts for need," she replied. "Not for loyalty." Silence sharpened between them. Thomas looked around the clinic, absorbing its modest order. "So this is what you prefer now?" he asked, a hint of accusation returning. "Living under another man's roof." The implication hung deliberately. Elijah's voice entered calmly. "Mrs. Whitmore remained here because she required medical care. Nothing more." Thomas gave a short, humorless laugh. "And you expect the town to believe that?" "I expect the town to believe what it chooses," Elijah said. "Truth does not adjust itself to gossip." Clara watched the exchange carefully. Where Thomas bristled, Elijah steadied. Where Thomas deflected, Elijah clarified. The contrast was no longer subtle. It was instructive. Thomas turned back to her. "Come home, Clara. We can start over. I'll rebuild the farm. I'll do better." She studied his face, searching not for perfection, but for sincerity. She found neither. "What has changed?" she asked quietly. "I have," he insisted. "How?" He opened his mouth and paused. The answer did not come easily. "I realized I don't want to be alone." The admission was unguarded and revealing. Clara felt something within her settle definitively. "You are not afraid of losing me," she said. "You are afraid of losing yourself." His expression hardened. "You owe me a chance." "I owed you fidelity," she replied. "You owed me protection. We are both past owing." The words did not tremble. They stood. Thomas's gaze fell again to Samuel. "He's my son." "Yes," Clara said, "and he will know that you left before he took his first breath." Anger flared across Thomas's features, but beneath it lay something closer to defeat. He had expected tears, perhaps pleading. He had expected gratitude for his return. He had not expected composure. "You'll regret this," he said finally. Clara shook her head. "I already live my regret." The simplicity of the statement left no space for argument. Thomas hesitated at the threshold, as though waiting for her resolve to fracture. When it did not, he stepped outside. The door closed behind him with less force than before, less certainty. Snow had begun falling again, light but persistent. Inside, the clinic felt warmer. Clara exhaled slowly, only then aware of the strain in her shoulders. Elijah approached but maintained respectful distance. "Are you certain?" he asked, not as pressure but as protection. "I am," she said. Samuel released a small, contented sigh, as though endorsing the decision. Clara moved toward the window and watched Thomas's figure recede down the road. He did not look back. For a moment, grief brushed against her, not for the man he was, but for the man she once believed him to be. Then even that faded, replaced by clarity. "I thought being abandoned would break me," she said softly. "And," Elijah prompted, "it revealed me." She turned from the window and met his gaze fully. There was no urgency there, no claim, only steady regard. "What happens now?" he asked. Clara looked around the room that had sheltered her at her weakest. She looked at her son, alive because someone chose responsibility over escape. "Now," she said, "I build something that cannot be ridden away from." The future remained unwritten, the town still watchful, the path uncertain. Yet for the first time since the storm, Clara did not measure her life by who had left. She measured it by who had stayed. And that difference would shape everything that followed.